The American War of Independence deprived Great Britain of one empire, but it strengthened the foundation of another. Examine the statement in the context of colonization of India. This was about Secure Synopsis, 14th of June 2021. Let's get started with the answer of this question. The American War of Independence 1776 to 1783 was concluded by which the British had to recognize the freedom of the 13th American colonies. British had lost their territories and market for their factory goods, especially the monopoly of tea, etc. They lost their source of raw materials like cotton in America. Britain's defeat in the American War of Independence meant the loss of American colonies and the end of British Empire. So they shifted their focus towards the east. Britain's defeat in the American War of Independence meant the loss of American colonies and the end of the first British Empire. Let's look at the steps taken by the British to consolidate its hold over India. Britain regarded itself as the ruler of the waves. The songs Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory shows this. Many British people at the time thought that they were doing the right thing by taking the British government and Christianity to the rest of the world, ending slavery and barbaric traditions and bringing civilization and an international Pax Britannica or British peace. The British generally felt that the way they lived their lives was the right way. Empire was now more than just about discovering new lands and building them up. Most of the world was now known and belonged to someone. Therefore, the British had to colonize established countries with populations and leadership systems of their own. Great Britain's attitude toward how to build its empire changed as well. Britons began to think of colonization more in terms of conquest and annexation, and as a result, it governed its colonies in a more authoritarian manner. It led to the Pitt's India Act in 1784, by which the British government brought the East India Company's rule in India under the control of itself. This act provided for the appointment of a board of control and provided for a joint government of British India by both the company and the crown, with the government holding with ultimate authority. It was done in the wake of fear of losing monopolies and the market of India and to prevent Indian people from revolting on the lines in America. The Governor General post was established in British India to control the administration and the crown ruled directly. The new administration expanded their military strength and focused on the expansion of the territory by any means. Lord Cornwallis, who played in controlling the American Revolution to some extent, was transferred to India to use his experience and not to repeat the mistakes which have been done earlier. Britain had to find a new market for its factory goods and raw material for their factory and to protect its monopoly of trade in India to compensate for the loss in America. It initiated differential trade tariffs and started building railways to give a competitive effect to their goods in the Indian market and use India as a raw material hub. It uses both expansionist tactics like subsidiary alliance and friendship to consolidate their control over the administration of the country. British also took the initiative to knock out French from India by annexing Yanam and Pondicherry and also defeated their alliance of Mysore. The learning that the British took from the American Revolution, which enabled it to take few steps. American Revolution influenced even the colonial policy towards white dominated colonies like South Africa, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Earlier they were given the concession in course of time, they were offered even dominion status. Furthermore, in the context of India, Pitt's India Act was established or introduced after losing America. Britain moved towards India and gave this colony higher value. After the American Revolution, the British modified its policy even to Ireland. Great Britain may have lost the 13 colonies America, but it still had Canada and land in Caribbean, Africa and India. Great Britain began to expand these regions, building up what has been called the Second British Empire, which eventually became the greatest or largest dominion in world history. Indeed, some historians argue that the support for the crown grew. Political life quickly settled into much the same patterns as before the war, albeit with a greater emphasis placed on public opinion, a stronger sense of political parties, and more concern with economic reform and corruption. Demobilization caused temporary difficulties, but low tariffs helped to stimulate trade and the economy recovered rapidly. By the 1790s, Americans were purchasing twice as much from Britain as they had as colonists in the 1760s. So the America became a new market for British goods. In the end, although Great Britain suffered temporarily due to the American Revolution, it eventually became an even more powerful and expansive empire as a result of it. The next topic is about important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunami, volcanic activity, and cyclones. Geographical features and their location changes in critical geographical features, including water bodies and ice caps, and in flora and fauna, and the effects of such changes. Let's have a look at the question under this. What is sea snot? How it formed, and what are the causes of its formation? Discuss its impact. Sea snot is also known as sea saliva or marine mucilage. It is a collection of thick, slimy mucus like substance found in the sea. It is composed of compounds secreted by marine organisms. Mucilage is a thick, gluey substance produced by nearly all plants and some microorganisms. A sea snort outbreak was first recorded in Turkey in 2007. Back then, it was also spotted in the Aegean Sea near Greece. But our current outbreak in the Sea of Marmara is by far the biggest in the country's history. It is formed when algae are overloaded with nutrients. Overloading of nutrients happens because of warm weather caused by global warming, water pollution, uncontrolled dumping of household and industrial waste into the seas. The overproduction of phytoplankton caused by climate change, the uncontrolled dumping of household and industrial waste into the sea, has also led to the present crisis in Turkey. Impact of sea snot. Marine ecosystem. The growth of the mucilage which floats upon the surface of a sea like brown phlegm poses a severe threat to the marine ecosystem of the country. It was already caused mass deaths among the fish population, also killed other aquatic organisms such as corals and sponges. Moreover, the mucilage is now covering the surface of the sea and has also spread to 80 to 100 feet below the surface. If unchecked, this can collapse to the bottom and cover the seafloor, causing major damage to the marine ecosystem. Over a period of time, it could end up poisoning all aquatic life, including fishes, crabs, oysters, mussels, and sea stars. Livelihood. The sneeze knot outbreak has also affected the livelihoods of fishermen. The sludge is getting collected in the fishermen's nets, making them so heavy that they break or get lost. Moreover, the mucilage coating the strings makes the nets visible to fish and keeps them away. Several experts have warned that the sea snot can cause an outbreak of waterborne diseases such as cholera in cities like Istanbul. Let's conclude this. Short term countermeasures include collecting it from sea surface and laying barriers on the sea surface. Long term countermeasures include improving wastewater treatment, creating marine protected areas, and limiting climate change. Let's move on to the next topic of general studies 2, the bilateral, regional, and global groupings and agreements involving India. Highlight the challenges associated with globalization in the current times and explain important role G7 can play in dealing with these challenges. This is a topic that was appeared in Indian Express. The G7 summit in Cornwall assumes great significance in pandemic-ridden world as well as with the new US administration under Biden. Globalization has taken a backseat and the current pandemic-affected world is said to be under globalization, which means slowing down of economies. In this backdrop, the US G7 summit is expected to throw light upon the route taken by developed nations. What are the challenges associated with globalization in current times? The COVID 19 pandemic has ushered in a new climate of uncertainty which is fueling protectionism and playing into nationalist narratives. Globalization is under significant threat as the governments scramble to reduce their vulnerability to the virus by limiting global trade and flows of people. With the imposition of border closures and strict migration measures, there have been major disruptions in global supply chains with adverse impacts on employment and poverty. China's aggressive foreign policy and its Middle Kingdom complex is a grave threat to international peace. US China trade war and rivalry is detrimental to world economic, making nations more proud in looking and protectionist. This has been touted as the new Cold War. Climate change remains the biggest challenge wherein nations have not been able to cooperate either to mobilize the finances or to other to stricter emission control. Role of G7 to elevate the challenges. There is greater expectations that the G7 summit at Cornwall endorse something like Cornwall Consensus to displace the Washington Census. The most significant expectation of the summit is that it will help determine the shape of globalization. There has been much such discussion of the possibility of the G7 pushing for global coordination on minimum corporate taxation and clamping down on tax havens. The commitment of G7 to provide 1 billion vaccine doses is a welcome step, but whether this crisis driven commitment will translate into enduring and just framework for providing global public goods on health and environment remains to be seen. In the context of rising geopolitical tensions with China, greater coordination and unity of purpose amongst the G7 will become more important. Next, G7 can diffuse threat of authoritarian disruption. This comes not just from states like Russia and Belarus, but forces that might want to subvert democracy are now at the heart of many Western democracies, including the US and Europe themselves. Greater global disarray strengthens the possibility of giving political succor to these political tendencies. It is important, therefore, to demonstrate that the G7 countries are part of a functional democratic civilization. G7 nations must declare firm commitment to emissions control and climate change finances to poor nations. Let's conclude this. It is reassuring to see that G7 think in the right direction, but if the G7 wants to truly exercise more leadership, it will have to convince the world that all its wonderful new policies or principles, resilience, inclusion, global public goods are not simply ruses to serve only the interests of the developed world, but also to develop the developing world. Of that important gestures like providing vaccines are not just one-off interventions in the aftermath of a crisis, only then will the Cornwall Consensus be more than a nice alliteration. Discuss the Lord Curzon's conceptualization of India's neighborhood and emphasize on frontiers and explain in what way the integration he foresaw is still relevant and can serve as a template for both India and India US partnership. More than any other figure from India's recent history, Curzon grappled with geopolitical complexities of Indian subcontinent and its neighborhood. The substrate of his reflections was not nationality or ideology, but geography and permanent interest that it produces for any power looking at the game board from India's position. Three tenets of Curzon's thinking seem especially relevant for India as it finds itself confronted with an aggressive China. Conceptualization of India's neighborhood, Lord Curzon. First, Curzon recognized that India's security depends upon its ability to exercise influence over a defined geopolitical space beyond India's own shores. He identified the space as extending from the Gulf of Aden in the west to the Strait of Malacca in the east. Whereas the Mughals tended to see India as an extension of geopolitics of Central Asia, Curzon understood that India's security and greatness were intimately tied to the maritime routes and choke points connecting it to Europe and the Far East. Lose control of these, and India would be hostage to its strongest landward neighbor. Second, Curzon recognized that India's main landward attention must be directed to its frontiers, namely to the task of maintaining viable buffer states in adjacent regions. Third, Curzon understood that building influence in these neighboring spaces required India to offer an attractive commercial and strategic alternative to the charms of its rivals. This required an attractive or active rather than passive policy aimed at integration of neighboring states into the Indian economy and infrastructure, which is neighborhood first policy. Relevance for India-US relations. USA needs India to become more active in the region that matters most for the US, the Western Pacific. In reality, what would benefit America most is an India that is capable of consistently projecting power and influence in its own home region. This would entail a combination of localized naval and littoral land strength and deep politico-economic relations with the smaller new neighbor states. India has a major role in USA's Asia pivot policy where it is trying to counter China's dominance. India can become a great power and counter Chinese aggression, which has increased in the recent times. This also means USA needs to work on the framework of India USA relations. That could include creating a legal category that would allow for technology sharing and deepening of defense ties without major non NATO ally status which India does not perfectly fit. It could include waiving US sanctions for certain Indian military and commercial activities that runs a fall of US sanctions on, say Moscow, but is necessary for activating New Delhi's resistance to Beijing. And it could include coordinating regional aid, investment incentives, and political priorities in places such as Myanmar or even deferring to India's lead when a more prominent US role would be counterproductive. But making the most of the US Indian relationship to thwart China's advance is not a one way street. It will also require India to continue taking on greater burden and risks than it became accustomed to in the World War and its immediate aftermath. If anything, Curzon's vision is more relevant for an independent India that is motivated to act out its own, unalloyed self interest. America and India both stand to gain from India's self realization of that vision. GS3, awareness in the fields of IT, space, computers, robotics, nanotechnology, biotechnology, and issues relating to the intellectual property rights. Data localization is undoubtedly a black dot in the idea of flawless concept of the internet as borderless world. In this context, discuss the scope and extent of data localization. Data localization means storing the data within the territorial boundaries of the country. In June 2019, RBI gave clarifications regarding the rules, stating that in the case the processing is done abroad, the data should be brought back to India in not later than 24 hours, and also the data should be deleted elsewhere. And in the case of cross-border transaction, a copy of data can be stored abroad. Issues with data localization. At present, India does not have the well-developed infrastructure to ensure the security of data. On the other hand, developed countries already have an efficient infrastructure, so rushing towards data localization may not be a wise step because without efficient infrastructure, the data is prone to cyber attacks. And the risk is severe here because it is financial data. But as the laws are made, it is a big challenge to develop efficient infrastructure at a faster pace. Storing data in India means higher operational costs for payment system operators because in other countries they have cheaper alternatives. And also for cross border transactions, they have to store data in two places, which increases costs. There is a probability that these extra costs may pass on to the consumers. And there is no guarantee that they will delete the data elsewhere. They may continue to store and analyze the data for their own advantage. We are in a globalized world at present. The world is running on the free flow of people, goods, services, and data. Data localization laws seems to be a part of protectionist policies, which is a threat to the free flow of data. The base of the internet is free flow of data. Data localization is also a threat to the main essence of the internet. US is against the data localization laws. It stands as natural because it increases the operational costs of US companies. India US bilateral relations are important for both countries because we are intertwined in export and import for IT services, professionals, and goods. So, imposing data localization laws without threatening the Indo US relations is another challenge. Innovation thrives when there is no much financial burden, and hence, data localization laws may threaten the innovation attempts in the digital payments industry. If the processing of the payment transaction is done in any other country, the country may ask these companies to submit the data. So, asking them to delete the data in 24 hours may interfere with the laws of the country where the processing is done. Data localization may result in government surveillance of its citizens. It is also against intellectual property rights because they use their intelligence to form systems that can benefit from the data it generates. But in the end, they are deprived of these benefits and someone else may use this data in their favor. What are the arguments in favor of data localization? India needs a data protection bill which is in the draft form. There are broadly three sets of arguments advanced in favor of imposing stringent data localization norms: sovereignty and government functions, referring to the need to recognize Indian data as a sole resource to be used to further national interest economically and strategically and to enable enforcement of Indian law and state actions or functions. The second claim is that economic benefits will accrue to local industry in terms of creating local infrastructure, employment, and contributions to the AI ecosystem. Finally, regarding the protection of civil liberties, the argument is that local hosting of data will enhance its privacy and security by ensuring Indian law applies to the data and users can access local remedies. Data localization is relatively a new concept. With time, we will know the real consequences of these laws. However, taking steps towards ensuring the privacy and security of the citizens' data is a very progressive step. Next, more to the next topic: science and technology developments and their applications and effects in everyday life, Indian economy, and issues relating to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development, and employment. Bitcoins have seen better validation and mainstreaming in the last 1 year. In this context, I explain how cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins work, why are governments and central banks suspicious of them. Explain. A cryptocurrency is a digital asset designed to work as a medium of exchange where individual coin ownership records are stored in a ledger existing in a form of a computerized database. It uses strong cryptography to secure transaction records, to control the creation of additional coins, and to verify the transfer of coin ownership. It typically does not exist in physical form like paper money and is typically not issued by a central authority. Cryptocurrencies typically use decentralized control as opposed to centralized digital currency and central banking systems. Significance of cryptocurrencies: corruption check. As blocks run on peer-to-peer network, it also keep corruption in check by tracking the flow of funds and transaction. Time effective: cryptocurrencies can help save money and substantial time for the remitter and the receiver as it is conducted entirely on the internet, runs on a mechanism that involves very less transaction fees and is almost instantaneous. Cost effective: intermediaries such as banks, credit card, and payment gateways draw almost 3% from the total global economic output of over $100 trillion as fees for their services. Integrating blockchain into these sectors could result in hundreds of billions of dollars in savings. Concerns over cryptocurrency: sovereign guarantee. Cryptocurrencies pose risk to consumers. They do not have any sovereign guarantee and hence are not legal tender. Market volatility: their speculative nature also makes them highly volatile. For instance, the value of Bitcoin fell from US dollar 20,000 in December to US dollar 3,800 in November 2018. Risk insecurity: a user loses access to their cryptocurrency if they lose their private key. Unlike traditional digital banking accounts, this password cannot be reset. Malware threats: in some cases, these private keys are stored by technical service providers, cryptocurrency exchanges, or wallets, which are prone to malware or hacking. Money laundering: cryptocurrencies are more vulnerable to criminal activity and money laundering. They provide greater anonymity than other payment methods since the public keys engaging in a transaction cannot be directly linked to an individual. Regulatory bypass: a central bank cannot regulate the supply of cryptocurrencies in the economy. This could pose a risk to the financial stability of the country if their use becomes widespread. Power consumption: since validation transaction is energy intensive, it may have adverse consequences for the country's energy security. The total electricity use of Bitcoin mining in 2018 was equivalent to that of mid-sized economies such as Switzerland. Cryptocurrencies in India. In 2018, the RBI issued a circular preventing all banks from dealing in cryptocurrencies. The circular was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in May 2020. Recently, the government has announced to introduce a bill, Cryptocurrency and Regulation of Official Digital Currency Bill 2021, to create a sovereign digital currency and simultaneously ban all cryptocurrencies. In India, the funds that have gone into the Indian blockchain startups account for less than 2.2% of the amount raised by the sector globally. The current approach towards cryptocurrencies makes it near impossible for blockchain entrepreneurs and investors to acquire much economic benefit. What are the issues associated with banning decentralized currencies? Blanket ban. The internet ban is the essence of the cryptocurrency and regulation of official digital currency bill 2021. It seeks to prohibit all private cryptocurrencies in India. However, categorizing the cryptocurrencies as public, government backed, or private, owned by an individual is inaccurate, as the cryptocurrencies are decentralized but not private. Decentralized cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin aren't, or rather can't be controlled by any entity, private or public. Brain drain. Ban of cryptocurrencies is most likely to result in an exodus of both talent and business from India, similar to what happened after the RBI's 2018 ban. Back then, blockchain experts moved to countries where crypto was regulated, such as Switzerland, Singapore, Estonia, and the US. With a blanket ban, blockchain innovation, which has uses in governance, data, economy, and synergy, will come to a halt in India. Deprivation of transformative technology. A ban will deprive India, its entrepreneurs, and citizens of a transformative technology that is being rapidly adopted across the world, including by some of the largest enterprises such as Tesla and MasterCard. An unproductive effort, banning as opposed to regulating, will only create a parallel economy, encouraging illegitimate use, defeating the very purpose of the ban. A ban is infeasible, as any person can purchase cryptocurrency over the internet. Contradictory policies. Banning cryptocurrency is inconsistent with the draft national strategy on blockchain 2021 of the Ministry of Electronics and IT, which hailed blockchain technology as a transparent, secure, and efficient technology that puts a layer of trust over the internet. What's the way forward? Regulation is the solution, right? There has to be a regulated market because of the excessive volatility. Clarity on cryptocurrency definition. There should be a proper definition put in place on what a cryptocurrency are actually is. Strong KYC norms, as every details of a particular customer has to be taken into consideration, and it should also be taxed and reported. Ensuring transparency, everything has to be audited properly, and the investor grievance redressal has to be put in place. Igniting the entrepreneurial wave is banning blockchain. Banning cryptocurrency will actually move people from one place to another place, that is, from India to other countries. India is currently on the cusp of the next phase of digital revolution and has the potential to channel its human capital, expertise, and resources into this revolution and emerge as one of the winners of this wave. All that is needed to do is to get the policy making right. Blockchain and crypto assets will be an integral part of the fourth industrial revolution. Indians shouldn't be made a to simply bypass it. The incidence of overlapping hazards in the country must drive the government of India to focus with urgency on long-term preparedness along with multidisciplinary approach. Elucidate. Cyclones along the western and eastern coasts amidst the pandemic alert us to the need for the long year preparedness, approaching a multidisciplinary approach to averting disasters, reducing vulnerabilities. And when overlapping hazards take place, each hazard having their own character, the final shape of the hazard is often a product of these individual characters. Within a span of week, the first western coast and then the eastern coast were battered with cyclones, Tokte in the west and Yas in the east. While cyclones and storms are not unusual in the eastern coast, but this time it was an environmental hazard happened in the middle of another mega hazard. The COVID 19 pandemic. Moreover, while the Yas cyclone caused immediate damage, the flooding it induced took the adversity to a different scale altogether. We need to take cognizance of the fact that such overlapping hazards could be a recurrent phenomena. Accordingly, the disaster risk reduction activities need to be geared towards first an interdisciplinary diagnosis of various risk drivers. Focus on building resilience in individual and community level. Also, marginalized population has to be taken care of. Limit the exposure by planning and zoning of the places so that biophysical vulnerability can be reduced. Early warning system has to be put in place. We need to strengthen the buffer zones and so that it can absorb shock of cyclones. Increase resilience of critical infrastructures such as schools, colleges, and hospitals. NDRF needs to be adequately equipped. Proper drainage system has to be put in place to avoid flood-like situations. NDMA empowered. It has to be made autonomous so that it can take its own decisions. Awareness about natural disaster has to be given out in school education. Also, only through a combination of these strategies can otherwise vulnerable population have the capacity to absorb, recover, adapt, and transform even in the face of overlapping hazards. There are multiple set of institutions, and a proper, this multidisciplinary approach has to be put in place.